Hey everybody, it's your Highness Pubert here. Welcome back once again to the series that will hopefully get me more views. First of all, sorry for the clickbaity title. I've actually never played the original game, so I have no idea how much they differ. This review will focus solely on how the game holds up as its own standalone game. I just didn't know what else to title it. I'm not that creative. Sorry guys. I've always been a huge fan of the Resident Evil series, although I've only ever played the remakes of them, never the originals, and they are very fun games. However, from what I've heard, you actually get more enjoyment out of the originals than you do the remakes, which is very disappointing honestly, and it leaves me wanting to go back and play the originals, which isn't really what a remake should be aiming to do. I'm mainly talking about the second and third remakes, but this isn't about that. This is about 4. So why the fuck am I talking about them? I don't know, let's just fucking get the review started, Christ! Resident Evil 4 follows sexy-ass Leon S. Kennedy about 6 years after the events of the second game. Here's a short recap of it in case you didn't play it. Shortly after all that, Leon undergoes grueling training to become an agent for the US government, apparently not having much say in the matter according to him. He then gets sent to an unnamed rural town in Spain to rescue Ashley Graham, the US president's daughter, who's being held captive there. Once he arrives, Leon discovers the villagers are hostile and everything goes wrong incredibly fast. As he ventures further into this town to rescue Ashley, he uncovers a dark and sinister mystery involving a scary tall Spanish man, a not so scary short Spanish man, and a very angry knife-wielding white man. The original game came out on GameCube in 2005 and quickly became recognized as one of the greatest games in the franchise, and of all time apparently. With the trend of Capcom remaking the second and third games, it seemed obvious that they were gonna remake the fourth one since it's the moneymaker out of all of them, even though the original has been ported to like every console imaginable at this point. The original game wasn't without its fair share of criticisms though. Even though it is considered to be one of the best games ever by many people, it was criticized for straying away from its original survival horror fixed camera angle formula for something more action-oriented and third person. After all, Resident Evil 4 is the reason the 5th and 6th entries are the way they are. So is this game really one of the best, or does it deserve the criticism it gets? Graphics and performance-wise, the game runs pretty well considering I'm playing it on an original PS4. It runs higher than 30 but less than 60 frames per second, which is honestly low-key impressive since I'm too used to playing every modern game at straight 30 at this point because I refuse to upgrade. The game also looks and runs very similar to the Resident Evil 2 and 3 remakes, which is definitely not a bad thing. All 3 of these games are really pretty, dark, and atmospheric, which is great. However, a lot of the textures of the 4 remake are very crusty, which I'm sure isn't a problem on PC or the modern consoles, so if this bothers you a lot, I'd suggest getting the game on those platforms rather than on last-gen consoles. Character animations are solid and all the new designs are cool. Leon looks pretty similar, except he's got a poofier jacket and looks a little more rugged. Ashley got a bit more of a redesign however. She looks more adult in this one and she's got a cute jacket, but her biggest design change is the fact that she chose to hide those big-ass monkey ears of hers with her hair. Man, fuck you, Ashley, I want to see those ears! Jokes aside though, I do like her new design in this game, and Ada Wong's design is pretty good. Louis Serre's design is honestly a lot better in this game than the original. In the original, he looks super greasy, slimy, and evil, but the remake version of him is a lot sexier looking. Like, I'd let this version of him do a lot of sexual things to me. All the designs for the enemies are pretty cool, and the boss fights are sick too. One problem I do have with the presentation of the game though, is probably the fact that Leon is pretty corny, and a little too talkative for my taste. But I do know that's like his main character trait, and it is a lot more charming than other corny protagonists, and it doesn't get unbearable like it does in Borderlands or Atomic Heart, so it gets a pass from me. Here are some examples of the silly little things he says.
Think you can swallow me whole, huh?
Talk about sticking the landing.
God damn. That was almost a pancake.
I like that one a lot though. It's similar to,
That was too close. You were almost a Jill sandwich.
You're right. Barry, thanks for saving my life.
and that line is just iconic. It does have that shit where they talk during the boss fight, so you gotta hear that dialogue over and over again every time you die.
Hey, it's that dog. Guess your tap dancing days are over.
Please stop doing this in your games. It just fucking sucks. Program a workaround for it or something. Oh, and something else is that the enemies will say shit while you're fighting or sneaking around them, which gets extremely annoying, especially if you're a Spanish speaker like me, because they have the same like 5 lines and they always have to fucking say them. For the love of God, either have enough voice lines so this doesn't become absolutely fucking unbearable, or just have them fucking shut up. I get it. Puedo correr, pero no me puedo esconder. Bro, I fucking get it. God fucking damn it! I'm sure it won't bother you if you don't understand what they're saying, so this just feels like an attack on me and every other Spanish-speaking person ever. Fuck you, Capcom. I live in the hopes that one day, game developers will learn their lesson and stop making video game characters so fucking chatty during gameplay. Once that day comes, I can die happy. One last thing, if you were wondering, yes, he does say it. I'm telling you this because I was personally a little worried they removed it. If you know, you know. On to the gameplay. From what I've seen, the gameplay is very similar to the original with a third-person perspective, except you get a crosshair in this one. I don't know much of the similarities or differences past that. The remake plays just like a normal-ass third-person shooter, except it's got a lot of the iconic traits from past Resident Evil games, like the inventory management, crafting, items, and other cool little things I'll explain here in a second. It's a very action-oriented game, so instead of fighting like 1 or 2 zombies at a time and making sure you're conserving ammo, you're fighting hordes of enemies trying to conserve ammo by using the game's other more action-oriented mechanics. Along with shooting enemies with guns, you can melee enemies, but not in the conventional sense. Instead of going up to an enemy and just slashing them with your knife, which you can do, you incapacitate enemies by shooting them a couple of times, which stuns them, then going up to them and performing a whole ass karate move on them. The cool thing about this is that if other enemies are around the enemy you melee, all the others get thrown back too, and although it is a bit silly looking, it is extremely useful since it can be used to control large crowds of enemies. Along with that, when you lay them out flat on the ground, you can use your knife to kill them instantly instead of wasting more of your valuable bullets. Your knife does have a meter though, and you can only use it a certain amount of times before it breaks, so you have to make sure to keep it repaired and upgraded as much as possible to be able to use it more. Speaking of the knife though, Leon is apparently a fucking connoisseur with it because he can parry almost any incoming attack. If your knife isn't broken, a prompt will appear in the corner there letting you know when you can parry an attack. Parrying an attack is useful as well because it will let you melee enemies and kill them without needing to use any bullets. And I say he's a connoisseur with the knife because just look at this. I mean, obviously this isn't possible at all in real life, but it's fucking awesome. Parrying is extremely satisfying, especially when you get to parry giant fucking monsters, and you can parry projectiles out of the air like crossbow bolts and axes. You can also shoot them out of the air with your bullets, but I've only ever managed to do that once in my entire playthrough. The parrying is so cool, there's a whole boss fight dedicated to it. All this shows you how fucking amazing Leon is with a knife apparently. There's also a pretty big variety of enemies to fight, which is always great. Leon gets to fight normal ass villagers, some with weapons, some with axes, and some with explosives and Molotov cocktails. Something else you can do to conserve ammo is to shoot these explosives out of their hands so they drop it and they explode, also damaging everyone around them. Additionally, some of the enemies can become stronger if you don't finish them off quickly enough. They can sprout this abomination with like bladed tentacles that can kill you pretty fast. However, you can kill these pretty fast with the flashbang. Stronger ones also show up, like ones with chainsaws and others with like masks that wield weapons and some other arm weapon thing. I don't know what the fuck to call that. There are other more creative enemies as you get further into the game as well, like this strong ass blind one with claws that hears your every move, armored ones with very specific weak spots, and these ones that regenerate when you attack them. Those ones are my favorite because at first they seem invincible, so they're fucking terrifying, especially when you discover there are more of them and that they slither all over the floor like fucking assholes. But later on, you discover you can actually defeat them, and they become a little less scary, and a fun challenge to beat. All these enemy varieties and combat situations make for a fun overall experience that never gets too repetitive. The game likes to swarm you with a bunch of enemies all at once, and figuring out how to dispatch enemies as quickly and efficiently as possible is its own fun little puzzle. This kind of gameplay definitely deviates from the survival horror formula that put Resident Evil on the map in the first place, but it's fun enough that it almost doesn't matter. I say almost because I do enjoy the survival horror gameplay from the previous entries a lot more, but this remake is still a ton of fun. I would say that overcoming these overwhelming encounters are the best part of the game, but the bosses are a lot cooler, except for the giant salamander one. But I'll save talking about those for later though. In between the enemy encounters, you loot for supplies and treasures so you can sell it and get upgrades for your weapons so you can kill enemies better. Additionally, you solve puzzles akin to older Resident Evil titles, which is cool I guess. My biggest gripe with the gameplay is that it starts off pretty slow until you find Ashley at the church. Most of the really cool stuff is after you find her. I mean, the beginning part isn't horrible by any means, but the story itself doesn't really pick up until then, so you feel like you're accomplishing nothing up until like chapter 5. Finally though, I haven't mentioned the epic Ashley gameplay. This entire game is basically an escort mission, except when Ashley is taken away from you for story reasons. She follows Leon around and you can decide whether you want her to stick right behind you or loosely follow you. The formation where she sticks right by you is better to use when you're running away from stuff, because if she's right by you during the battles, she just gets in the way and can get hurt or captured by the enemies. If she's captured, she lets out a blood-curdling scream and is taken away by a random enemy. When this happens, you have a limited amount of time to kill the enemy before she gets taken away for good and you get a game over. Ashley can also get hurt by enemies, and you if you're a fucking asshole. When this happens, she gets downed and you have to come by and pick her back up. If you don't pick her up when she's in this state and she gets hurt again, she fucking dies, and it's a game over for you too. This may seem annoying on paper, but it really isn't. Making sure Ashley is out of harm's way adds another fun element to the combat, especially in this part of the game where you can't get too close to her, giving the gameplay a little more depth. However, I do wish she wasn't so useless. Sure, you can use her to reach places Leon couldn't reach by himself, but other than that, she doesn't do anything. I get that she's a damsel in distress, but I think she wouldn't be such a burden if you could give her one of the shittier knives you pick up as loot, so she can defend herself a little bit, and you don't have to hear her scream so fucking much. Like I mentioned earlier though, defending her does add a little more depth to the gameplay since you prioritize her life over yours, because she essentially only takes 2 hits before she dies, compared to your big ass life meter. I'm just glad she doesn't have her own big ass health meter, because you'd have to use your health items on her and that would have been ass. Besides, she gets taken away a lot for story reasons, so you don't have to deal with her bullshit the entirety of the game. Oh, and there is a section where you get to play as her. I guess the devs wanted you to believe she wasn't so useless. But she doesn't have any way of defending herself, so you spend the entire time scared out of your mind, hoping you don't get seen by the enemies that would annihilate you in one hit probably. I say probably because I never actually got hit by those motherfuckers, since I'm great at video games. It's almost like you're going back to the survival horror roots of Resident Evil. Almost. Even though she does save Leon after, she's still useless. As mentioned earlier, the story involves Leon S. Kennedy being sent on a mission to find the president's daughter who was captured by the Spanish cult Los Iluminados, which translates to the Illuminated, or the Enlightened. And as he arrives at the village the cult is located in, he discovers the state these villagers are in are a result of Las Plagas, or the pests, which are parasites that leave the host susceptible to suggestion and can be commanded to do the bidding of a person that controls the main parasite, which in this case is Osmond Sadler. During the events of the game, Leon gets infected with Las Plagas a little after Ashley does, and it becomes a race against time to find a way to get rid of the parasite from their bodies before it's too late. Throughout the game, you encounter Luis, a former Umbrella scientist, and Ada Wong, along with some quirky infected characters that aim to stop you from saving Ashley, like Mendes and Salazar. They're all very memorable characters, with Mendes' towering figure being reminiscent of Mr. X, Salazar being lord of a cool-ass castle area, and Osmond Sadler being evil and very purple. The story is fun, simple, and has that Japanese flair and eccentricity that makes Resident Evil so special. The dialogue can get kind of goofy and cheesy, especially Leon's, but it's part of the game's charm. It doesn't become so unbearable that it makes me want to turn the game off, except maybe for this line.
Guess your tap dancing days are over.
Why did you feel the need to say that?
Polly dick and balls in my tight adult male asshole. Are those spoilers for the Resident Evil 4 remake?
Here's a timestamp. Here's the part where I'm talking about late game stuff, so if you're interested in playing the game at all, I recommend you stop watching right now. Alright, so further into the game, you discover that His Holiness, Lord Sadler, was an Umbrella scientist that was tasked with the research on the Las Plagas parasite, hence his non-Spanish name. Once he discovered their mind-controlling traits, Sadler plotted to rid the world of human suffering by controlling literally everyone on the planet and have them not go to war and shit. His plans included kidnapping and infecting Ashley and then sending her back to the US once the Las Plagas parasite was fully developed within her, allowing it to spread to the president himself, and you can probably guess what would happen from there. It's also discovered that the person that kidnapped Ashley was Jack Krauser, Leon's former commander who taught him how to be a master of the ways of the knife and all the other cool badass shit he does. My favorite part about the Jack Krauser stuff is that they incorporated Leon's crazy ass knife parrying gameplay into the story. These aren't just silly little gameplay mechanics anymore, they're part of Leon's character. Incorporating gameplay mechanics into a character makes the game feel less shallow and gives the mechanics a deeper meaning. There's even a whole boss fight with Krauser where you can only use the knife, further cementing Leon's skills with it, and the dialogue exchanges between the two during the fight adds even more to that. I know I said I don't like those dialogue exchanges during boss fights, but this one was fine because I actually didn't die during it and didn't have to hear the dialogue again. This is honestly genius, and I applaud Capcom for managing to make something so ridiculous so believable and awesome. Something that's not so awesome though is towards the end of the game, Luis ends up dying tragically. Only after this cool ass minecart section though. Because of this, Leon gets the key to his lab, which proves useful in ridding the Las Plagas parasite from both him and Ashley via 5G radiation. And in Resident Evil fashion, they then confront Sadler with Ada Wong and fight to the death on an island after Sadler turns into a giant disgusting monster freak twice. And Leon and Ashley escape the island on a jet ski after Ada Wong takes off with a piece of Las Plagas amber, which she was tasked to retrieve for the company she works for, which Albert Wesker is involved with. That boss fight with Sadler though was pretty cool. Some of the more memorable parts of the game were definitely the crazy ass boss fights. All the boss fights after the Salamander one are really great. Mendes turns into this tall skeleton scorpion looking thing that's cool to fight, especially since you can parry its attacks when he's on foot. And fighting in a burning barn is a fucking awesome setting to fight in. You fight Jack Krauser on two occasions, one where he's a normal dude, and the other when he unleashes the powers he received from Sadler, where he becomes yet another mutant freak. And he's a bit tricky to fight the second time since he can block your bullets. Fighting this boss is memorable just because of the student versus master dynamic they have. Defeating Salazar though is pretty straightforward, but cool design-wise. It's difficult to describe what he even becomes, but it's still memorable. I don't have any complaints about the story or the boss fights at all, except maybe the dialogue that repeats when you die during a boss fight, but I've already talked about that enough. I honestly can't find anything I dislike about this game, except maybe for the slow start and dialogue, but those things are overshadowed by the amount of fun I was having trying to survive hordes of Los Iluminados with my quick thinking and epic knife skills. Resident Evil 4 is a very solid entry to the franchise. However, I do feel the departure from the survival horror formula is a bit much. Even though the game is incredibly fun to play, it leaves you wishing it was more like the previous entries of the franchise, where it isn't so action-oriented. Regardless of this, it still somehow captures the spirit of what makes Resident Evil a fantastic franchise. Capcom decided to do something different with the series back in 2005, and I'm never opposed to something different as long as it's unique and has its purpose, which Resident Evil 4 definitely has. I'm beginning to understand why some people believe this to be one of the best games of all time, but I still prefer the 2 remake, even though I've heard the original Resident Evil 2 is better. Survival horror is one of my favorite genres in video games, and there aren't many good ones anymore. I'm glad Resident Evil has been making a comeback, especially with how awesome 8 was, and it excites me to see what the future has in store for the franchise. If you enjoyed my funny little opinions here, then you should subscribe and get to watching all my videos and hearing more of them. So go ahead, do it now, and make sure not to die before my next video comes out. Adios!